The sun had long set over the streets of Harlem, but the city was alive in a way only Harlem could be. An electric hum of energy that ran through the veins of the people. The music from the jazz clubs bled into the air, mingling with the whispers and hustle of the underworld. On the surface, it looked like another night in the heart of New York City. But beneath the glitz and glamour, something darker was stirring. A meeting that would forever change the landscape of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson stood in the shadows of the doorway, his eyes scanning the room of the luxurious penthouse. The scent of expensive whiskey and cigar smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter. Around him, the city's most influential figures were gathered. Men and women of high society, business elites, and artists. But among the crowd were a few faces that didn't belong. Hollywood's brightest stars, figures who had made names for themselves on the silver screen, now stood side by side with Harlem's criminals. Bumpy had been invited to this meeting, but it wasn't a friendly gesture. It was an opportunity for Bumpy to expand his empire in ways that no one could have predicted. In that room, surrounded by the glitz of Hollywood, Bumpy had become a player in a game that went beyond the streets of Harlem. It was a game of power, money, and influence, a game played on a global scale. And Bumpy, as always, knew how to play it, too. The men and women in the room knew who he was. They knew the name Bumpy Johnson, the notorious figure who had taken control of Harlem's criminal underworld with nothing more than his wits, his power, and his unflinching resolve. But tonight, they weren't just concerned with his criminal empire. They were here to see what kind of man he truly was. They were about to find out just how far he was willing to go to secure his place among the most powerful people in the world. Bumpy made his way to the table where two Hollywood stars sat, Charlie, an up-and-coming actor known for his dangerous charm, and Sarah, a famous screen diva whose name was on everyone's lips. They were laughing, but there was something in the way they looked at Bumpy that told him they weren't laughing at all. They were sizing him up. "Mr. Johnson," Charlie said with a sly grin, standing to offer a handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you." Bumpy shook his hand, his grip firm. "I'm sure you have," he replied, his voice smooth but with an edge that commanded respect. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locked on Bumpy's. "We've been waiting for this moment. Harlem has always fascinated us. But I'm curious. How did a man like you end up in this world?" she asked, her voice both curious and calculating. Bumpy didn't flinch. "I didn't end up here. I made my way here piece by piece," he said. "Nothing in this world comes for free. You either take it or you lose it." Her smile faltered for just a second before she regained her composure. "A man who knows what he wants," she murmured. That was all the invitation Bumpy needed. He knew the Hollywood elite had always been drawn to power, whether it was on the screen or off. And power, in Harlem, had always belonged to him. Bumpy Johnson's reputation wasn't born out of a single event. It was built on years of hardship, survival, and a ruthless drive to rise above his circumstances. Born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1905, Bumpy's early life had been one of poverty and struggle. He had been thrust into a world where survival meant learning to navigate both the streets and the complex systems of power that ran through them. His family, poor and working class, struggled to make ends meet. But from a young age, Bumpy had a deep understanding of the world's injustices. He moved to Harlem in the late 1920s, drawn to the promise of opportunity and a place where he could rise to power. Harlem, with its vibrant music scene and thriving cultural renaissance, was also a hotbed of criminal activity. But unlike most men who came to Harlem with nothing, Bumpy had something more than ambition. He had a mind that understood the value of respect, loyalty, and fear. By the early 1930s, Bumpy had already made a name for himself in Harlem. He controlled the numbers racket, and through a network of connections, he expanded his reach, taking control of the local drug trade, gambling, and even bootlegging. His empire wasn't built on luck. It was built on a deep understanding of human nature and the ability to manipulate people with precision. He didn't just fight to win. He fought to make sure his enemies knew that there was no coming back from crossing him. But Harlem was changing. As the Harlem Renaissance faded and the Great Depression deepened, the city was becoming more than just a cultural center. It was becoming a battleground. Political figures, the police, the mafia, and even the federal government were beginning to take an interest in the city's underworld, especially in the wake of Prohibition. Bumpy had already earned the respect of the streets, but his ambition didn't end at the borders of Harlem. He was always looking for ways to expand his influence, his reach. He had worked with the mafia, but he had never fully aligned himself with them. He knew that power wasn't just about control, it was about opportunity. And Hollywood? Hollywood had the kind of opportunity that most people in Harlem could only dream of. By 1939, Bumpy's name had become synonymous with power in Harlem. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a king in a city that had its own rules. But that didn't mean he was untouchable. There were still rivals who sought to take him down, and the law, although often corrupt, had a way of making a man disappear when he became too powerful. The meeting with Hollywood stars in 1939 wasn't just an opportunity for Bumpy to expand his empire. It was a chance for him to connect with the most powerful people in the world. A chance for him to make deals that weren't just about drugs and gambling. This was a chance to build something bigger, to tap into an entirely new world where money and influence flowed freely. As the meeting continued, Bumpy sat back, listening more than he spoke. He had seen enough in his life to recognize when someone was trying to play him, and he could tell that Charlie and Sarah weren't just interested in the power he commanded. They were interested in using him. The entertainment industry was looking to control the narrative of Harlem, and they knew that Bumpy was the man who could help them make it happen. But what they didn't realize was that Bumpy wasn't just anyone. He didn't do favors without understanding the full cost of the deal. Charlie leaned forward, sensing the shift in the conversation. "You know, Bumpy, we're looking to create something that resonates with the streets, with real people," he said, his voice a little too smooth. "Hollywood has always been about selling fantasies, but you're the real deal. We need someone who can bring that authenticity, that raw power to the screen. We need your help." Sarah's eyes narrowed, the subtle shift in her expression betraying a hint of calculation. "We're talking about bringing Harlem to the big screen, Bumpy. The world is fascinated by the underworld. We want to tell that story, but we need someone who knows it from the inside." Bumpy raised an eyebrow, but his face remained calm. "And what's in it for me?" he asked bluntly. "You want to put Harlem on the map, but you're asking me to help you do it? You think I'm going to help you sell a story for a cut of the profits?" Charlie's grin faltered slightly, but Sarah, ever the strategist, stepped in. "What we're offering isn't just money, Bumpy," she said, her voice smooth and persuasive. "This is about more than just a film deal. We're talking about opening doors, doors that go beyond the streets, doors into the world of Hollywood's elite. You could be more than just a criminal kingpin. You could be a man with influence in both worlds. Your name could be on the lips of politicians, businessmen, and even the president. You'd be untouchable." Bumpy leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Untouchable, huh?" he repeated, his tone soft but filled with weight. "You're offering me the world, but I know better than to trust what you're selling. So tell me, why should I take this deal?" Sarah met his gaze, her eyes unblinking. "Because the world is changing, Bumpy. And if you don't adapt, you'll be left behind. This is your chance to move beyond Harlem and into the history books." The challenge was set. Hollywood saw Bumpy as a means to their end, but they didn't yet know the full extent of his ambition. He wasn't just going to play along with their game, he was going to play his own. Bumpy sat silently for a moment, weighing the proposal, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. It wasn't about money. Bumpy had plenty of that already. It wasn't about the fame either. Harlem knew his name, and that was all that mattered. No, what Bumpy saw in their offer was power. a chance to cross boundaries he had never even considered, a chance to influence the kind of world he'd only glimpsed through the glossy pages of Hollywood magazines and the glimmering lights of movie premieres. But there was a catch, and Bumpy knew it. Hollywood was all about control, and once they got their hooks into you, they didn't let go. He wasn't about to become just another pawn in their game. He needed something more, something that would give him leverage, something that would let him control the narrative, not just play a part in it. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his fingers steepled in front of him. "So, you want me to give you Harlem?" Bumpy said, his voice low and steady. "But what makes you think you can walk in here, throw around some promises, and expect me to just hand it over to you?" Charlie's confident smile faltered for just a second, but Sarah remained unfazed. She had the look of someone who had been trained to control the conversation, to bend the will of those around her without seeming to try. But Bumpy wasn't like the others. He wasn't a starry-eyed young man who dreamed of fame and fortune. He was a kingpin, and he wasn't going to be bought that easily. "You're right," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "We're not asking for Harlem. We're offering you the opportunity to expand your empire. Hollywood is a new frontier, Bumpy. The film industry is growing, and so is the influence of those who control it. We're not asking you to give up anything. We're asking you to join us, to use your street smarts and your influence in a new arena. You could be the most powerful man in both worlds, the streets and the screen." Bumpy's gaze didn't falter. He had seen all kinds of people come to Harlem with promises. Men from the police force, the mafia, and even politicians. Each one offering something, but each one also asking for something in return. The problem with deals like this was that they always had strings attached, strings that tied you down and made it impossible to break free. "What's the catch?" Bumpy asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "You don't get this far in life without knowing there's always a catch." Sarah's lips curled into a smile. "The catch is simple, Mr. Johnson. We need your trust, your loyalty. Hollywood is built on stories, and right now, we need a story that resonates with the streets. You know Harlem, you know the people, the struggles, the culture, and that's what we need. We need to tell a story that speaks to the heart of America, and you're the man who can make that happen." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Hollywood wanted more than just a man with street smarts. They wanted a piece of Bumpy's soul, a piece of his control over Harlem. And Bumpy, ever the strategist, knew that once he agreed, there was no going back. Hollywood didn't play by the same rules as the streets. They didn't care about loyalty the way Harlem did. To them, Bumpy was just another resource, a tool to sell a story. But he wasn't naive. He knew that sometimes you had to play the game to win it. And for a man like Bumpy, who had spent his life carving out power and influence from the streets of Harlem, this was another game he could win, if he played it right. He sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room once more. The stars, the agents, the men and women in the room, they all saw him as just another player to use. But what they didn't know was that Bumpy wasn't just playing to survive, he was playing to take over. "All right," Bumpy said, his voice steady and decisive. "I'll bite. But understand this. I don't play anyone's game but my own. If you want my help, you're going to play by my rules. This isn't about a film, it's about power. And you'll do what I say when I say it." Charlie and Sarah exchanged a look, and for a brief moment, Bumpy could see the flicker of realization in their eyes. They had underestimated him, just as everyone always did at first. But now they understood. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another man they could manipulate. He was a force in Harlem, and the streets had always taught him one thing: control everything, or be controlled. "Deal," Sarah said, her tone sharp and final. "We'll make it happen, Bumpy. But you'll need to move fast. The world is changing, and we can't wait forever." Bumpy stood up, his chair scraping the floor, the movement commanding attention. He reached out a hand to Charlie first, then to Sarah. His grip was firm, unyielding. "This better be worth it, because once you've got my loyalty, it's not easy to get rid of." The weeks that followed the deal were a whirlwind of activity. Bumpy wasn't just sitting back and letting Hollywood do all the work. No, he was using this opportunity to further solidify his empire, pushing into new markets, gaining new allies. Hollywood had opened doors for him, and he intended to make sure those doors stayed open. The first project was a film about Harlem's underworld, a story about power, betrayal, and the men who ruled the streets. The script was based loosely on Bumpy's life, but it painted him as a character who was more myth than man. Hollywood stars like Charlie and Sarah were involved, and the film was set to be a hit. The streets were abuzz with talk of the movie, and Bumpy, as always, found a way to turn the attention into power. But Bumpy wasn't naive. As the film gained traction, he started to realize something he hadn't fully anticipated. Hollywood's version of Harlem wasn't his version. The film, though successful, portrayed the streets in a way that made Bumpy and his men look like caricatures. Criminals, thugs, violent men with no depth or honor. It was a story that sold well to the public, but it didn't capture the truth of Harlem, the truth of the people who had made it what it was. Bumpy had built his empire on respect and loyalty, not the flashy, superficial image that Hollywood wanted to sell. He had no patience for the way they romanticized crime without acknowledging the sacrifices, the struggles, and the real cost of survival in Harlem. As the premiere of the film neared, Bumpy knew that he had to make a choice. He could let Hollywood continue to use him as a puppet, controlling the narrative of Harlem and his legacy, or he could take control of his own story and show them that he wouldn't be played. The confrontation came on the night of the premiere. Bumpy stood in the theater, surrounded by the high society of Harlem and the glitzy world of Hollywood. But his eyes were fixed on the screen. As the film unfolded, he could feel the anger rising in him. This wasn't the story he had agreed to. It was a lie, and it was time to correct that. The film ended with a flourish, but the audience's applause felt hollow to Bumpy. He stood, the room going quiet as he walked down the aisle toward the exit. Charlie and Sarah rushed to meet him, their faces flushed with excitement. "Bumpy," Charlie said, his voice eager. "This is it. This is the moment that will define us. The whole world is going to see the power of Harlem through your eyes." Bumpy turned to him, his face cold. "No, Charlie, this isn't my story. Not the way you've written it. I'm not some thug you can sell to the masses. If you want to tell the real story of Harlem, you're going to have to do it on my terms." Sarah's eyes widened. "But this film is a success. People love it." "People love what you've sold them. But you're not selling my truth," Bumpy said, his voice low and dangerous. With that, he turned and walked out of the theater, leaving behind the world of Hollywood and the promise of fame. He had never needed that kind of validation. Harlem had made him who he was, and it was in Harlem that he would continue to build his legend. Bumpy's decision to walk out of the premiere wasn't just a rejection of Hollywood's version of Harlem, it was a statement. In that one move, he reminded the world, and Hollywood, that he wasn't a man who could be molded into someone else's narrative. He was the architect of his own story, the king of Harlem, and no amount of glitter or gold could change that. The next morning, the streets of Harlem buzzed with a different kind of energy. Word spread quickly that Bumpy had walked out of the film premiere, and the reactions were mixed. For the film's producers and Hollywood stars, it was a slap in the face. But for the people of Harlem, it was a moment of affirmation. Bumpy wasn't just a character on a screen. He was the real deal, a man who ruled with strength and honor in a world where that often got lost. Charlie and Sarah, though initially shocked, soon realized the gravity of Bumpy's decision. They had hoped the film would not only make them rich, but also give them control over Harlem's image, a powerful commodity in Hollywood's eyes. But they didn't fully understand the complexities of the man they were dealing with. To them, Bumpy was a symbol, a means to an end. But to the people of Harlem, Bumpy was a legend, one who could not be reduced to a fantasy. The filmmakers tried to salvage the situation by offering Bumpy more money, more influence, and even a more prominent role in the story. They promised to rewrite parts of the film, make it more authentic to the streets, and portray Bumpy in a better light. But Bumpy wasn't interested in more money or fame. He had already built an empire on his own terms. What mattered to him was respect. Respect for who he was, where he came from, and the truth of the world he had fought to control. The filmmakers, desperate for Bumpy's approval, arranged another meeting. This time, they didn't come with promises of money or fame. Instead, they offered Bumpy something more tangible: control. They were willing to hand over the rights to the story, to let him tell it the way he wanted. It was a risky move, one that could make or break their careers, but they knew that without Bumpy's blessing, the film would never have the same impact. Bumpy considered their offer carefully. He had nothing left to prove in the world of Hollywood, but what he had now was the power to shape the narrative. If he took control of the story, he could turn it into something that not only represented his legacy, but also reflected the truth of Harlem, the struggles, the triumphs, and the lives of the men and women who had built the streets. After a long pause, Bumpy finally spoke. "I'll take your deal," he said, his voice firm. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for Harlem. If you want my story, you better tell it right. You better show the world what it really means to fight for your own." The filmmakers agreed, and with that, Bumpy Johnson took control of his narrative. He didn't just own the film rights, he owned the message it sent. From that point on, he became not just a part of Hollywood's machine, but a force in shaping how the world viewed Harlem and the men who fought to survive in its unforgiving streets. In the years that followed, Bumpy's influence continued to grow, not just in Harlem, but across the entire world. The film, now retitled and rewritten with Bumpy's input, became a smash hit. It was the story of Harlem, told by a man who had lived it, who had fought for it, and who had made it his own. The film didn't just make money, it made Bumpy a legend beyond the streets of Harlem. He had done what no one else had. He had claimed control of the narrative, not just the streets. Hollywood's image of Harlem had always been skewed, a romanticized version of crime, danger, and glamour. But Bumpy's film was different. It was raw, it was real, and it resonated with audiences across the world. For the first time, people were seeing Harlem not through the eyes of outsiders, but through the eyes of the people who had built it. It was a story of resilience, of fighting against the odds, of surviving in a world that constantly tried to break you. The impact of the film was felt far beyond Hollywood. Politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement took notice of Bumpy's power and influence. He had become a symbol of something greater than himself. He was the embodiment of Harlem, the man who had taken the streets by force and turned them into an empire. He had navigated the treacherous waters of both the criminal underworld and Hollywood, and he had come out on top. But despite his newfound fame, Bumpy never forgot where he came from. He continued to rule Harlem with the same iron fist, the same respect for loyalty and power that had made him who he was. His people, the ones who had stood by him through thick and thin, remained loyal. They knew that Bumpy wasn't just a man who sought wealth or fame. He was a man who fought for their dignity, for their survival. And in return, they gave him the one thing that mattered most: respect. As time went on, Bumpy's name became synonymous with power, resilience, and loyalty. He wasn't just a kingpin, he was a legend, and that legend was now a part of history. The world knew his name, not because of his criminal empire, but because he had taken control of his own story, his own destiny. He had become a man who could never be erased, a man whose legacy would live on for generations. Bumpy Johnson's secret meeting with Hollywood stars in 1939 wasn't just about making a film or securing a deal. It was about control. It was about the power to shape a narrative and the strength to fight for what was rightfully his. In that moment, Bumpy became more than just a criminal. He became a symbol of a man who refused to let anyone define him but himself. The story of Bumpy Johnson is one of resilience, defiance, and ultimately, legacy. In the face of overwhelming odds, he never wavered. He carved out his empire on his own terms, and when the world tried to sell him a story that wasn't his, he took control of the narrative and made it his own. This wasn't just about one man's pride. It was about a community's dignity and the lengths one man would go to ensure that the world saw him for who he truly was. It was a reminder that sometimes it takes a legend to show the world what respect really means.